Well, hello, everybody. Once again, it's me, Dr. Lenny, and I'm doing the second session of our Genesis Bible study. We're going from Genesis chapter 1 through Exodus 20. We're going to talk about the first three covenants and a lot more. So I want to encourage you as I go through to feel free to pause the video or to go back and re-listen to things. I realize that I move pretty fast. I'm going to try to slow it down a bit this week and go through the material a little slower. Today, we're going to go from the Yahwist view of creation, which is Genesis chapter 2, up until the first murder of Cain and Abel. So we're going to stop at Cain and Abel and catch up with them next week. So let's get started. If you missed the first Bible study session, we went over the Genesis chapter 1 and we talked about the priestly creation story. So in Genesis chapter 1, you have the priestly creation story. In Genesis chapter 2, you have the Yahwist creation story. And if you look at the Yahwist, they were about the 10th century BC. So we know that this story is the first of the creation stories, but it's in the second chapter of Genesis, whereas in the priestly creation story, it was about 550 BC. It was written during the exile, but yet is chapter 1. And so the priestly era of authors and editors were the ones who had final edit, and they decided to move it first. And so today we're going to start with the Yahwist account of creation. And so some of the subtle differences between the creation stories is that the Yahwist, their main focus is on the relationship of man and woman to each other. And their focus is on relationship of man and woman to the world. That's what they're working through here. The creation story pretty much goes through Genesis chapter 2 through Genesis chapter 5, at least till 5 verse 32. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the subtle differences, and we are going to complete this story here. So some of the differences is that before creation, in the Yahwist view, it wasn't watery chaos, but it was a desert. So there was no water. The land was barren because there was nobody to till the soil. And the farmer is pretty much the star of this creation story, where you have, in the first creation story, God's holding back the water from destroying and flooding out the world. There's a basin on the bottom and a basin on top and then land. And so God, through God's grace, he holds the waters back. Where in the Yahwist version, water seems to be much more friendly and needed. It's part of what's necessary to cultivate the plants and the things that sustain us in life. And so they have a little bit different view. So in the priestly creation story, humans were created on day 6. The Yahwist, God creates the humans first. So the first thing God creates is the human. And the human is in a desert. Also, if you remember from last week, Adam is kind of it translates not great into the English where we translate it as man, but rather there's a view of human and humanity in the plural. So as we go through this and the creation of man, you're going to notice that it really is talking more of humanity, which we'll see in the next session, in session 3, when we get to Cain and he gets exiled, and all of a sudden his wife appears. And so it's the idea of humanity, and we're discussing this view of man and woman making up humanity, and that's what we're trying to understand is the human's relationship, man and woman's relationship to their surrounding world. So the human creature in the Yahwist version, he's created from the ground. And this is important. Yahwist a lot of times circle back and they always give us a great finishing. So if you think about it, the ground is really important because we're created from the clay, the ground. It sustains us in life. We grow our food. And then when we die, we return to the ground. So it's very important. And if you think about Adam in Hebrew means human, and Adamah is ground. So there's a play on words here where humanity and the ground are very closely related because it is such a powerful connection between the two. The second thing is, so from the ground, humanity is created. And then Yahweh breathes life. So he breathes life into the nostrils, giving the human being life. It's the breath. The Christian view is that this is the beginning of the soul, but of course, the Hebrews didn't have a word for soul back then, so it doesn't translate well there. But now the Christian understanding is that he breathed the soul into us. And God's breath is so important. The Yahwist view has God always very close to us, understanding that it's even from God's breath that we get. And when God breathes into us, we live, and when he takes it away, we die. That's how important God's breath is. So very, very beautiful understanding of our relationship to God, that he gives us the very breath that we have, and it belongs to him. It's a gift. And like every gift, like almost every breath we take is a thanks to God. When Yahweh creates the animals, he also gives them breath. But there's you can distinguish between animals and humans because God doesn't talk to the animals. God only speaks to the human beings. And it's that speaking that shows that we have a special bond, a special relationship to God. And God gives Adam, as Adam the man, the ability to, Adam in humanity, allows humanity to name all the animals. And so by naming them, if you remember when God named the sun and moon, light and darkness, means he has control over that dominion. And so when he allows humanity to name the animals, he's giving us dominance over the animals. But we're stewards of the animals, so we have a obligation to treat them well and to live in harmony with them to the best of our ability. Obviously, we eat them, so there's that, but we do have to treat them well. After God creates man in the Yahwist version of creation, then he creates the habitat for us to dwell in, and that's Genesis 2:4 through 2:9. So he creates humans. We're literally in a desert without water. Then God creates the Garden of Eden. And then the Garden of Eden is what's going to sustain us. But he creates humans first versus all of the cosmos first. In the first one, he creates light, and then he builds the habitat, the oceans and everything. And then when it's all done, he creates man, humanity. Where in this one, he creates humanity first. Then he creates the habitat for us. So the Garden of Eden is probably not like a garden that maybe we think about today, where you have rose bushes and things like that. It would have been large trees, shady trees. As a matter of fact, it even says that Yahweh relaxes in the cool of the evening underneath the trees. So Yahweh would come in this idea that he would come into the garden with Adam and Eve and relax in the cool of the evening. There's two main trees that are really worth noting in the Yahwist version, and that's the tree of life which as long as we have access to the tree of life, we'll live forever, and we are not subject to death. Once we lose access to the tree of life, then our life is threatened and we're subject to death. Now, the tree of life doesn't play a part until the very end of chapter 3, I think, when humanity loses access and they put the cherubim guarding it so that now we're subject to death. And that's actually it's the end of chapter 2. And that's where we lose access to the, where we become subject to death. And now we suffer. Whereas before that we didn't. And then the tree of knowledge, and that's the story of the forbidden fruit, and it brings sin into the world. And so those are the two main trees in the garden that we're going to chat about, the Yahwist write about in Genesis chapter 2. If you're wondering where the Garden of Eden was, the only real access that we have from the Bible is that it was by the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Phaeton, and the Gihon. And we don't know where, we can't locate the Phaeton and the Gihon. So it's somewhere in that region in the Middle East is where the Israelites are talking about when they're writing this, but we don't know exactly where it is. Once God creates man, Adam, as the man, he has to give him a purpose, and he gives him a purpose, and it's to take care and cultivate the Garden of Eden. So that's Genesis 2:15-17, where God says, take care and cultivate the Garden of Eden, which is, once again, man is created from the ground. We have to take care of the ground. And after we sin, we return to the ground. And so his job is to take care of it. But he needs a helper. And so God says in Genesis 2:18-24, it's not good for the human to be left alone. And this kind of brings out 2 points, that human beings are of a social creature. We need one another. We need to be around each other. If we're left alone for too long, our mind begins to unravel and it's unhealthy. So we need to be we need to be social and together. It also kind of solidifies the marriage relationship between man and woman. Eve is the helper fit for him, as the scripture says. So he sends them the animals first, but they're not a good fit to be his helper. And helper doesn't mean like carry my purse or carry my bag. It's somebody. Helper is not a great word in English to really justify the importance of Eve to Adam, because helper means one who will help them fulfill their destiny. So woman is the one who man finds support and strength, and her role is to help man fulfill the destiny, as man's job is to help woman fulfill their destiny. And as Christians, our destiny is we want to get to heaven. So that's our ultimate destiny. But we help each other. We help one another in our life too. Whereas of the last 100 years, it seems like men and women have been pitted against each other, where by our design, men are trying to take advantage of women. And now it seems like women and men are always in conflict, which really hasn't been the case throughout history. We've been working desperately hard to survive together, working hard to make it as a team. That doesn't justify bad things that men do to women. It happens, and it's terrible. That's certainly not the idea of creation, of God's idea of creation and the relationship between man and woman. And there's no justifiable reason why a relationship would be toxic in that sense, and it has happened. But the real idea is that we work with each other and we are important to each other, because only man is a good fit for a woman, and only a woman is a good fit for a man. That's the idea behind the creation story here. Whereas in Adam and Eve are dimorphic, and the two main purposes is in the early scriptures is to find and possess land and to multiply, to grow as the human race. And it only can happen through the completion of man and woman joining as a partnership, helping each other find their destiny. In the Yahwist creation story, Eve is created from Adam's rib, and no one really knows why the rib or what the rib signifies. So I did some research and I tried to find this out again. It's not the first time I've looked into this. And once again, there's a bunch of theories of why the rib, like there's extras, but they're simply just theories. Like you may have an extra rib, or the ribs are what protects the organs. It's a more important piece, but there's really no explanation that I find that's why it was a rib and not a shoulder blade or kneecap, or it's just what the author chose. Now, for the 10th century BC Israelites, Adam calls his wife Eve. And so this is hard for 21st century people to explain, because remember, who names has dominion over. So God named the light and darkness. He has dominion. He created everything. He has dominion. Adam named all the animals. Adam is humanity. Humanity has dominion. Well, here Adam calls his wife Eve. He has dominion. Well, that's 10th century BC thinking. You can't get around it. It's just how they thought. However, it is also important to note, though, look at his name that he gives her. The mother of all living things, right? So Eve means mother of all living things. This is a grand name. It really shows Adam's appreciation for the dignity and the honor he has for her by the name of mother of all living things. He didn't call her, trash heap or something ridiculous. He called her something with a lot of integrity, mother of all living. So that's important to know. And then it's also important to know that marriage is a covenantal relationship, as seen in chapter 2, verse 24, where it says that man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and the two of them become one body. This is how important these 10th century BC people thought of the relationship between man and woman, and how important a woman is to a man, that he leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife. I get the view of clinging when it doesn't say he holds her hand or is attached. It clings. So I get the view of like my children when they used to cling to my feet, and I'd walk around and they'd hold on as I walked, clung to my feet. That's the image I get. It's a very beautiful image. So yes, Adam calls his wife Eve, meaning he has dominion over her from 10th century BC thinking. But at the same time, he dignifies her with the mother of all living. And then we find out that a man clings to his wife because she is what's going to help him fulfill his destiny. Without her, he's not fulfilling his destiny. Only a woman is a good fit to help the man. So a conclusion over the Yahwist account of creation is that the Yahwist account is much more localized than the priestly account of creation. It's concerned with the human relationship between man and soil. Humanity comes from the ground and depends on the ground for life, and humanity will return to the ground for which he or she came. Concerned with the relationship between man and woman, not with man in the universe, as is the priestly account. The priestly account is much more concerned with the relationship of the man in the universe, which the priestly account to Genesis chapter 1. But here, we're much more concerned about the relationship between man and woman, not only with each other, but with their surrounding tribes and people. And so woman is the only suitable helper for man. She's made from flesh, and the attraction of the sexes and institution of marriage are the natural destiny of man and woman. And Yahweh is close to nature and concerned with all of his creation. Versus he created it, steps out and comes back. So those are some of the differences of the Yahwist view of God and creation. So now we're going to move on to the sin of Adam and Eve. So we just finished out the creation story, and now we're going to get into the relationship. So far, there's been three characters: God, Adam, and Eve. And this is one of my top 5 favorite verses of the Bible. I love this verse. It says, "The man and his wife were both naked, yet they felt no shame." That concludes Genesis chapter 2. And it's such a great view. When we're living virtuous and righteous lives, we feel no shame. But when we sin and we start to pull away from God and we're doing things we know we shouldn't, we feel shame and guilt. So the idea that it ends with this idea that man and wife were both naked, yet they felt no shame because they were walking and they were right with the Lord. And I just think it's a great image, because eight verses later in Genesis 3, chapter 7, they're going to be naked and ashamed. And it's happened so quick. So here's the fourth character that's introduced, the serpent. And so the serpent in Genesis is in chapter 3 is not revealed to be the devil. That doesn't happen until the 1st century BC with Wisdom's 2:24 and Enoch 69:6. That's when they start realizing that the serpent was the devil. But in Genesis, it doesn't say that. The serpent is just evil. And historically, a little bit of historical context of why a serpent may have been chosen. Not only does the serpent crawl on its belly, but the serpent was revealed in the surrounding tribes as a fertility god. And Israel, if you read the Old Testament, regularly falls into the temptation of worshiping false gods. And so historically, we realize that this was happening. And so there's a pretty good chance that the authors chose the serpent so that the Israelites would stop worshiping false idols. And they would say, see, evil comes from this serpent. So they wanted them to stop worshiping false idols and only worship God. And so that's probably had something to do. There's probably many reasons why they chose the serpent, but one of the reasons that they probably chose the serpent was because they wanted them to stop worshiping the fertility cults that were in the surrounding tribes. They wanted it to stop. So it was a warning: stay away from fertility cults. The serpent is viewed as a source of evil, and stop. Now, in Genesis, we have no motivation of why the serpent wanted to tempt Adam and Eve. Later on, theology builds upon the idea that it's the devil, and the devil doesn't care for humanity, won't bow to humanity, and won't serve humanity. So that comes later on. The Yahwist probably didn't have any understanding of this at this time. Remember, the Bible was brought up orally for many generations, centuries, probably before it was written down, and then it took a millennia for the Old Testament to be completed. So the source of evil is still left a mystery to us in Genesis. We don't know why the serpent's evil or why the serpent wants people to be removed from God. But what the Yahwists were the point that they were making, though, is that evil's in the world, and evil's in the world as a result of humanity's decision to oppose God's command. So evil isn't a thing in of itself. It wasn't created by God. There is no creation of evil. Evil is simply when you remove the good from God's creation. So the tree of knowledge wasn't evil. The fruit wasn't evil. But then the serpent comes And then Adam and Eve choose evil when they disobey and separate themselves from God. They eat of the forbidden fruit. And once they do that, that is what creates evil, not God. God didn't create evil. Humanity does. When we turn from God and we take out the good of his creation and use it for evil. So when we understand evil, that's something we have to understand, that God doesn't create evil. He gave us free will. And from that free will, we remove the good from God's creation when we turn and make decisions without God's wisdom. So the great lie that the serpent told was that you will be like God, right? That's the underlying theme of what he talks about. We're going to talk about the three half-truths on the next slide, but the great lie is you will be like God. But we already know from the Genesis chapter 1 that we're created in the likeness and image of God. We are already like God. We're creating in his likeness and image. So the devil says, if you do this, then you'll be like God. But we already were. So there's only it's the lie that they breaks into fall through, and once again it falls into the three half truths, which we'll get to in a minute. But the brilliant presentation of the characters and the Yahwist view of creation is that you have the serpent come. So the serpent comes, he talks to the woman talks to the man. Then God addresses the man, then the woman, then finally the serpent. But God punishes first the serpent, the woman, then the man. And so the Yahwists are great about doing this. They love wordplay. And so the serpent comes, talks to the woman talks to man. Now, there's something to think about. When the serpent came to the woman and Eve decided to eat of the fruit first, Adam was sitting right there. And in 10th century BC, or the 1,000 years BC, man was supposed to be the woman's protector, and he failed at his duty. Eve takes the apple, or not the apple, the forbidden fruit, and she eats of it. Adam doesn't protect her from it. Then she turns to Adam and says, eat this, and he does. So the serpent goes to the woman, to the man, then God addresses the man, and Adam is hiding. And when God says, why are you hiding? Adam responds with, because I was naked and shame. But Adam wasn't naked. We'll see that as soon as they ate the apple, they realized instantly, or I keep calling it the apple because that's how it's depicted, but the forbidden fruit. It was probably not an apple, but the forbidden fruit. As soon as they eat the forbidden fruit, they realize they're naked, and they sew loincloths and they cover their nakedness. And then God's looking for Adam, and he's hiding. And finally, they say, why are you hiding? He says, because I was naked, which wasn't true, which I'm actually going to get to more on the next slide. Right now, I want to finish that. The three key points of the key points of the story is temptation, and how Israel keeps falling into temptation, and that there's three half truths that the serpent uses, which is you'll not die, and they didn't die, but they became subject to death, and they eventually die. They didn't die right away. I always kind of view like Adam watching Eve to see what happens, because technically God told Adam not to eat of forbidden fruit. Now it's supposed that Eve knew. If you read the story, it seems like she realized that she was doing something wrong. So Adam at some point shared with her that don't eat that fruit. But God told Adam, don't eat of this fruit. And then he lets Eve eat of it, and then she doesn't drop dead. And so he takes a bite. But their eyes were opened, and then they realized they were naked. So they didn't die right away. And then it says The second half truth is your eyes will be opened. Well, they were opened, but not in the way that they expected their eyes to be opened. They expected their eyes to be opened in this grandioso way, and where they maybe had knowledge that they didn't have, or they could see and have a deeper understanding of their surrounding. But that didn't happen. And they say, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And once again, they felt shame and guilt, which they had not experienced before. So once again, it wasn't like they expected. So there were three half-truths that the serpent used to suck Adam and Eve in. And this is Genesis 3, Genesis chapter 3, verses 4 and 5 is where you'll find that. So Genesis 3:6, I'm going to read this. The woman saw that the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eyes, and the tree was desirable for gaining wisdom. So she took some of its fruit and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it. So Adam, like I said, watched Eve do it. She didn't do it off on her own. He was right there and allowed it to happen. He didn't do his role as a husband. 10th century, BC. It's a problem. And then Genesis 3:7. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves and made loincloths for themselves. So I love this view. So just like I said, Genesis 2, chapter 25, the man and his wife were naked and they felt no shame. Well, here we are 8 or 9 verses later, and they feel shame. So it happened so quick. The fall was so quick. Just a bite. That's all it took. So understanding the question of good and evil, like who can know good and evil? Well, children don't know good and evil. I have a 3-year-old, and keeping her dressed is sometimes a challenge. She has no shame being naked. She doesn't know shame. She doesn't know sin. And at her age, she really can't sin because she doesn't know the difference. She doesn't have the ability to comprehend. Although we're teaching her and learning, and now at 3, she is starting to understand right and wrong, but she still doesn't have shame. So humankind, we can know good and evil to some extent. Scientists tried to understand truth and good and evil, and philosophers good and evil. Artists try to show good and evil through art. Writers through literature try to show good and evil. Poets try to show good and evil and experience it and express it. And there's many more, but these are the ones that I thought of and wrote down. So we're trying to understand the difference between good and evil. But the reality is only God knows good from evil, and he's limited humanity's knowledge of what's best for us. So what happens when we overstep our limitations placed on us by God? We make decisions based on what we think is best for us as creatures, and not with the wisdom and guidance of God. And you can see this with things like, there's questions about cloning human beings. Is that now that we know how to do it, is it something we should do? Or are we doing this because it's best for us? Our careers are, creating organs, and are we destroying life? Are we going into an area we shouldn't? We don't really understand that as humanity yet. And so you can see we have the same problems of understanding good and evil now as they did 3,000 years ago. We're still trying to figure it out through, philosophers, artists, writers, poets, scientists. We're trying to understand the good, this idea, which is really important, that when we make decisions, we really should do it with the guidance of God and his wisdom as well. Like we need the wisdom and the guidance of God in order to understand what we're doing. A great example is that Einstein was for making of the atomic bomb, the nuclear bomb. And then once he saw what he did, he regretted ever endorsing the Manhattan Project. He regretted that decision once he saw the destruction. So he made a decision what he thought was best for humanity. And then once he saw it, he realized that that's not best for humanity. But he did it, he endorsed it without the wisdom and knowledge of God and the guidance of God. So that's just one practical example. So back to Adam hiding from God. I love this part of the story because it's beautiful. Adam hides from God, and God asks him, "Where were you?" Adam says, "I hid because I was naked." But that's not entirely true. Adam was covered in fig leaves. But the authors are getting through the point that you can't hide your sin and shame from God. You're always naked in your sin and shame from God. So once you sin, you're naked to God. You cannot hide that. You can't cover it up. You can't cover up your sin. And so only God can remove our guilt and shame. So in Genesis 3, chapter 21, God makes garments for the man and woman, removing their shame. Only God can do it. And that's beautiful imagery where here we are naked, even though that we're covered, but we're still naked in our sin. Only God can remove that and make the clothes and the garments that will remove that sinfulness. And it has to be at his will to do it. So one of the other things I really love is when God talks to Adam, he says, why did you do this? Well, Adam blames the woman and indirectly blames God. This is verse 12. He says, the woman you gave me tricked me into eating the fruit. So he's saying, you sent this person who made me eat the fruit. And then he looks to the woman and says, why did you do this? And then she turns and she changes the blame to the serpent. The serpent made me, tricked me into eating the fruit. They're passing the blame. They're not taking responsibility. We still see that today. People don't want to take responsibility for their sin. When a company dumps poison into the water that causes cancer, people respond, God, why do you allow this to happen? Well, God, you allowed this to happen. Well, don't shift the blame. Humanity has free will. We poured the toxins. We allowed the toxins to be poured into the water. We allow it for profit, for whatever reason, for convenience, and then the consequences come, and then we want to blame God. It's the same today as it was 3,000 years ago. We have to take responsibility for our own sin and our own shame, and then we can move past it once we take responsibility. And just to kind of finish off, the Yahwist use poetic form. So, the serpent will crawl. So we go into poetic form of the punishments. So the serpent will crawl. That's the serpent's punishment. He'll slither on his belly. The woman will have pain in childbirth. That's her punishment. And farming will be very difficult for the man. That's his punishment. And once again, the farming gets back into the Yahwist idea of the importance of tilling the land. From the land we sustain our lives, and from the land we will return. So another punishment, death. For you are dust, and so dust you shall return. That's verse 19. We're removed from the tree of life. We're banished from the Garden of Eden and removed from the tree of life. The tree of life, and then God sends cherubim to protect with a fiery sword. This is often symbolized as a lightning, which is symbolic of God's wrath. So if you see the cherubim with their wings forward and their sword, it's usually like a lightning sword, and it shows that symbolizes God's wrath, like we did something really bad. And once we were removed from the tree of life, which comes back into the end of the chapter 3, then we are now subject to death, and we die, and we all die. And so that's the idea. But the Yahwist give us an uplifting ending, which is very nice. So first, Eve receives her name. Even though the whole forbidden fruit thing happens, she receives her name, and her name means mother of all living beings. So that's a beautiful name, a beautiful image. So she's going to be the mother of all humanity. Yahweh makes garments for them, and he covers their shame. He removes their shame. Adam was unable to create garments, and Eve was unable to create garments that removed their shame. The fig leaves they covered themselves didn't remove the shame. It wasn't until God made the garments. Once God made the garments, their shame was removed. Only God can remove our sin, and only God can remove our shame. And so it's beautiful that God, through his own initiative, wanted to restore the relationship that was disrupted by sin. And so we get that uplifting ending, which is beautiful. Okay, so that's it for this week. Next week, we're going to go into the first murder of Cain and Abel, and we're going to finish until well past, I hope, through the flood. So that's going to be it for today, and we're going to pick up next week with the first murder, Cain and Abel. And Cain murders Abel, his brother. And I hope you enjoyed today, and look forward to seeing you next week. God bless.